I am Jonathan Humphreys. Welcome to the Hokoso Conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Hokoso, the Conversation. This is focused on intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship. This is with John Wagner. He is one of the inspirations of the hospitality industry. He's built Cycas Hospitality, which is now one of the largest white label operators in Europe, with franchises from Marriott, Hyatt, and IHG. He has been listed as one of the best companies to work for. His journey in entrepreneurship started from when he was a child, and he has wonderful experience of entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship along the way, and he embodies the entrepreneurship spirit. And some of his learnings are absolutely invaluable for anybody who is looking to create, develop, innovate for the hospitality business and other businesses going forward, which is obviously what we need more than ever coming out of one of the worst crises that we've seen in modern history. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this podcast with John Wagner and you follow our journey and our discussion together. The overall topic is on intra and entrepreneurship and the spirit of entrepreneurship. What I was thinking is that we could start with your history in terms of your relationship with Jack DeBoer in the US. But what I was wondering is, when was your earliest time when you thought about being an entrepreneur?
This is a relatively common occurrence. As I look back when I was a little kid, I was the kid in the neighborhood that got greeting cards by mail order and then went around the neighborhood and sold them. And I was the kid that was shoveling snow for the neighbors. And I was the kid that was cutting grass for the neighbors. And I was the kid that was hired to help clean out the neighbor's garage. And so I was always doing that kind of stuff when I was a little kid. I don't know where it came from. It's not as if I earned a lot of money. It's not as if I was desperately poor and we needed the money for food. It was none of those things. For some reason, it was just incented in me from somewhere that I wanted to be working. I wanted to be doing stuff. I had my very first proper job. It was technically illegal because I was underage, but I knew somebody who knew somebody. I got a job when I was 14. It was a proper job. I was making $1.25 an hour. I was working at a gun range, pulling skeet and trap and that kind of stuff, just because I knew somebody who worked there who got me a job. Yeah, I was 14 when I had the job, and you had to be 16 to legally have a job. Yeah, there you go. I wanted one, and they closed their eyes and let me do it. And now that I think about it, I've been working ever since. Or some people would say I've never started work. I've had a job of some form ever since then.
When work's fun.
Well, yeah, I suppose I've reached the age now where it's ironic. The first time in my life, I'm technically old enough, and I probably have enough money that I could retire. And it's absolutely the last thing in the world I want to do. And back to the theme of entrepreneurship, I said that I've had a job ever since then. In fact, the job is not exactly, I've been working ever since then. First years were jobs, of course, but in the last decade or two, it's been jobs where I'm working for myself.
Yes, it's fascinating. I think I was starting around the same time, actually. There was a local cafe. We lived on a tourist area in England on the Isle of Wight. And I think I was around the same age, 13, 14 pound an hour. But I was doing it for the opportunity to not have to ask for money from my parents for everything that I wanted to do, because sometimes I would get a yes and sometimes I would get a no, right? Or why do you need that? So there were far too many questions. So I decided I couldn't be putting up with the questions. I thought I'd just go out and get some myself.
I've forgotten that, but there's no doubt in my mind that probably was a factor going into that as well. Yeah, I had my own money.
Like a sense of independence, really. So your first proper job, real job, you were in the US. Set the scene a little bit.
Yeah, it depends how far you want to go back into proper jobs. When I was in high school, I had a dozen different part-time jobs and after-school jobs. I worked all the way through from 9th or 10th grade, after-school jobs and paper route and jobs, working in a hot dog fast food restaurant. I worked in a department store selling TV stereos. I worked in a factory making camper vans. I was a janitor in a hospital and dozen more that I can't remember. I did that all the way through high school. I got a job towards the end of high school. I worked the midnight shift in a truck stop in Denver. That then led on to, this is crazy, but I became a truck driver part-time on weekends and school holidays. Somebody I met through the truck stop. I drove a U.S. mail truck on contract from Denver to Albuquerque, leaving Denver at 4 in the afternoon and arriving to Albuquerque at 8 o'clock the next morning, and then turned around at, I forget what it was, 7 or 8 o'clock that night and back to Denver the following morning. I suppose that was a proper job. And I worked at that truck stop and driving trucks through university. Towards the end of university, I suppose you could categorize this as my first real job. Towards the end of university, must have been like 20 or 21, I got a job with United Airlines.
All right.
And that was, I guess, the first job that I didn't have grease under my fingernails at work. I worked at the airport in Denver. And then when I graduated university, I continued on with United Airlines, going from a part-time job to a full-time. I got into the management training program, pretty sophisticated training program they had then. It was a year, maybe 14 months at United. Worked in virtually every department of the airline, from flight simulator training to the pilots, to the maintenance base, to in-flight services, to the ramp, to passenger service, accounting in the head office, cargo sales. You spent a week to a month in each of those departments all through United Airlines. That was a really cool experience. I really loved that. Including, they used to fly, they still do, they trained pilots. They had a training plane that was not suitable for passengers because it had been in an accident. So it couldn't take passengers, but they trained pilots in it. And I hitched a ride in the training plane. It was a DC-8. And I went up one night with a bunch of trainee pilots doing aerobatic maneuvers in a DC-8.
Amazing.
A lot of steep dives and stalls and steep turns and in a DC-8.
You didn't get the flying bug then, John?
No, I got my pilot's license during that time as well.
You did?
In fact, truth be told, I had my pilot's license before I had my driving license.
That's a pretty cool thing to say.
I always wanted to fly, and I had my mother take me to flying lessons, and I was able to get that. And then a couple of months later, I got my driving license. But yeah, I had a pilot's license. My ambition always was to be a pilot. And I got a few hundred hours, but this is back in the 70s. And at the time, you had all these guys coming out of the Vietnam War, all these guys who had flown B-52s and fighter jets and cargo planes. They were coming out with 10,000 flight hours. They were getting jobs at United Airlines, and my 200 hours in a Cessna 152, the prospects of a job at the time were pretty bleak. I kind of gave up. There was just no chance I was ever going to get a job in the near future as a pilot competing with those guys, and switched my major at university from a pilot's major to business.
When I was 14, 15, I joined the Air Cadet Corps. I think in the 80s, obviously, the Top Gun movies were out.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to do aerobatics as well in a Chipmunk, which was
That's pretty cool.
Fantastic. So I got the bug with that. That was my ambition as well. So I went through officer training corps at university. And actually, so a long story because it's not my podcast, but several years ago in Switzerland, I took it up again because I always said I wanted to fly solo. I did a few solo flights across the Alps here, and it's in a Cessna. It's just fantastic.
Geez, that would be a cool experience.
Yeah, really amazing. And I was almost studied aeronautical engineering. So I had like 3 offers on aeronautics and space engineering, and ended up going to Edinburgh doing general chemical engineering. Yeah. Anyway, so what happened? You were at United, and then, so how did you make the transition to the hotel hospitality space? Because that was that a next move, or was there a couple of moves in between that?
Nope. I working for United Airlines. I was on an airplane because I flew a lot. That's what you do working for an airline. And I met vice president of sales of Marriott Hotels at the time. From memory, there were 26 Marriott hotels in existence at the time. And this guy was the vice president of sales, and we struck up a conversation. Obviously, we hit it off. I liked him, and he liked me. And he said, geez, did you ever think about coming to work for Marriott? And I had heard of Marriott before because I was kind of in the travel business. I had heard of him. It was not a household name by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, with only 26 across the country, very few people will have ever heard of it before, but I had heard of it. And anyway, he caught my interest. He said, well, look, why don't you come talk to somebody? And he hooked me up with somebody who I went to see in Denver. I even know the guy's name, Roger Dow. He'd been with Mary for 20 or 30 years. Went to see him, and there you go. And the irony of it is, and this will sound very Machiavellian, it isn't this way at all, but 2 years later, I had the job of the guy that had interviewed me on the plane. It was a total coincidence. Yeah, so I moved from Denver to Chicago. I was making $21,000 a year at United, and I was hired by Marriott at $13,000 per year because I thought the opportunity was good. I liked the company, I liked what I heard, and I liked the job that was there and what I thought I could do with it. And so I took the chance, took a good-sized pay cut, and moved from Denver to Chicago. And I would say that probably turned out pretty well.
I guess there was an upside to the salary and sales in those days as well, or not?
No, I got a small bonus. It wasn't that much. Yeah, so that was the start of the hotel career, if you will. I went to work first in an off-property sales job in Chicago and did that for a year, and then moved on to property-level sales in property outside of Chicago. The Lincolnshire resort, you would say Lincolnshire, but I would say Lincolnshire, and worked there for a few years. And then Marriott transferred me to, Ed Fuller transferred me to London. When I got to London with Marriott, there were only 2 open hotels outside of the U.S. One was Amsterdam and one was Acapulco.
That's incredible. Hold on a second, John. Just going to get something for you. So, probably know this book, huh?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact.
There you go, Mr. Ed Fuller. You can't lead with your feet on the desk.
He was my boss, direct boss, twice.
Ah, really?
He's an odd character, isn't he?
He is. He is an odd character. I never saw him behind the desk, that's for sure. Which is fine. It's absolutely fine. He was the epitome of building relationships. I think that was his raison d'etre. Spent most of his time traveling the world doing that.
My favorite story is, and he told it to me once, and I had heard about it before, that he twice in his career with Marriott did round-the-world trips where he went all the way around the world and never slept in a hotel bed. He only slept on airplane seats, booking himself on overnight flights to go around the world. Got up and did work, and then got on another flight the next day and went on to the next destination. I'm amazed that he's lived as long as he has. I predicted for so many years that he was just going to drop dead on the way to gate 58.
Especially with all the radiation that you got from the planes in those days, right? So all of this was kind of scene setting. How did you end up meeting Jack DeBoer? Because obviously Marriott hadn't bought Residence Inn at that point.
I'd gone through a number of jobs with Marriott in London. I came back to Bethesda, was in the head office as a regional director of marketing. I had 13 hotels in New England that I was responsible for sales and marketing. And as anybody who works for Marriott, they frequently get headhunter calls. And I did. And I took one, and I met Rolf Rufus. Do you know that name?
Rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah, he was Jack's business partner at Residence Inn. I met Rolf at the Green Tree Marriott in Pittsburgh for an interview. We liked each other and hit it off, and he recommended me to Jack. I flew out on one Saturday morning out to Denver, met him at the airport in Denver in his private jet. He had been in Aspen. He stopped in Denver. We coordinated that that's where we'd meet up. He landed in Denver to pick me up, and then the two of us, and there were a couple other guys on the plane, but the two of us sat from Denver back to Teterboro, New Jersey, and talked for the whole 3.5 hours. That was my interview with Jack. And I guess I did okay because he offered me the job. And so I left Marriott and moved from Washington to Wichita, Kansas. Not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. Was Jack's, still is, his home and his headquarters for what was then Residence Inn. It wasn't Marriott's Residence Inn, it was Residence Inn. The story is a little more complicated than that, but probably too much detail. In fact, Jack was a franchisee. He had sold it to Bob Brock of Brock Hotels a year or two before. It became a role reversal. He sold the rights, but then became a franchisee. And 3 or 4 months after I got there, Jack bought it back from Bob Brock, and Jack then became the master franchisor again. And that's when I started. There was a small group of employees. Jack only had, there were 20 or so Residence Inns, of which Jack had 7 at the time. So I joined a company that had 7. And in the 5 years that I was there, Jack was there, we grew it up to 125, 150 Jack-owned and franchised Residence Inns. And during that time, he sold 50% of it briefly to Holiday Inn. We were a partner of Holiday Inn for a year and a half. Jack bought it back from Holiday Inn and then immediately sold the whole thing to Marriott. And that's when it became Marriott Residence Inn.
I guess just to scene set this, how old was Jack in those days? Because he was in the construction business and this was his first creation of a concept Residence Inn.
Yeah, Jack was at the time 50. He's in his middle 80s now. So he's 25, maybe 30 years older than me. Yeah, I was director of marketing and then became vice president of sales and marketing for what was the Residence Inn company and then Marriott Residence Inn. Jack had been in the residential construction business, building apartments all over the Midwest. He got a start in Michigan. And he built 20,000 apartments all over the central U.S., flew his own airplane to different locations, but then was quite open about the fact he overextended himself in the big savings and loan crisis of the 70s, lost it all. He's very proud to say he never went bankrupt, but most other people would have gone bankrupt. He closed it down. He lost everything. He lost everything except he was left with 2 small wooden construction apartment buildings in Wichita. And there was no housing market, no residential market. He was left with these things producing no income. He couldn't find residential tenants, but he knew, because he was smart and observant, Boeing has a big factory in Wichita. And that factory continued to go even during this dramatic recession of the 70s and the savings and loan crisis. And he figured out that the Boeing engineers that were coming down from Seattle to Wichita, they needed something different from a hotel. He concocted this residential scheme that he rented these apartments out to these Boeing engineers a week-to-week basis. And they didn't have to sign a lease. They didn't have to make a big deposit. He treated it like a hotel, but they could take it on a week-to-week basis. And then he would, for an extra charge, he'd rent them sheets, he'd rent them dishes, he'd rent them TV. He's since changed all that, but at the time, that was the idea. And he quickly filled up what were apartment buildings by selling them. The initial success led him to believe that there was something there. And what became Residence Inn evolved from those 2 64-room apartments, one in East Wichita, one right in downtown Wichita, that operated as Residence Inns up until a few years ago. And they fell apart. They were too old, and so they fell apart. But they were the first 2 Residence Inns.
It's an amazing story. I mean, what I love about this story is in the face of adversity, really. I mean, most people would have just shut shop, gone off and done something else. But he was able to see an opportunity to bounce back from it. I get a sense if we're looking for common traits with entrepreneurs, that ability to just seize an opportunity, even this crisis, we're going to see some great innovations come out of this crisis and some people really bouncing out of this crisis. I think it's that ability to see an opportunity even when everything else seems pretty dark around you.
I think if I've learned anything, and I must say I didn't only get this from Jack, but he certainly is the personification of this. And in fact, the title of his book is Risk Only Money. It sounds silly, but if you think about it, you never risk your reputation, your integrity, your connection with your family. You never risk the relationship you have with people. Risk money, because that's a thing that you can replace, but you can't replace your integrity once it's lost. You can't replace the relationships. So if you've got that mindset, which clearly he does, and I'd like to think I do too. Look, I've had some knockbacks. He's had some really significant knockbacks and failures, outright failures. Everybody has them. But I can honestly tell you, I just don't lose sleep over it because I know the sun's coming up tomorrow. And I know that if it's been a knockback, I got it once, I can get it back again. In the end, it's only things. And if you don't risk that other stuff, well, things can be replaced. And he's got this attitude, this can-do attitude. The number plate on his car always was can do. C-A-N, new word D-O, can do. That's his attitude towards life. You give me the problem, I'll figure out how to get it done. I can do it. He lived and lives his life that way. And it's in no small part the reason he's been as successful as he has is just never say, I'll figure it out. I don't know how. That's a big problem, and that's a tough one. I'll struggle with it, but I'm going to get through. I'm going to get through it. I know I am. And no matter what happens, the sun's coming up tomorrow. So there you go. Lucky me, I'm still here.
It's a great approach to taking risk, really. I guess the question is, it sounds easy to separate those things, to say risking only money. It's obviously his approach. How have you managed to do it, John, where you've been able to isolate relationships, I would say reputation and money? They are sometimes, especially in an entrepreneurial environment or a business environment, you're getting into business with partners and they're so intertwined. How do you separate them? How can somebody separate them to improve their chances of resilience or building resilience? Because I think that's really important. If you build a personal resilience, you can call it building a personal immunity nowadays. How you've managed to psychologically and physically do that?
If I'm there now, it's because I've been unsuccessful at it so many times for so many years in the past. I'm old enough and ugly enough now, and I got the battle scars. I've made some horrendous mistakes not doing it right. And so it gives me wisdom because I've seen all the places where I really screwed it up in the past. By really screwing it up in the past, I can see now on reflection how I screwed it up, where my mindset was wrong. So you'd like to think, geez, the older you get, the smarter you get because you don't have to make those same mistakes. I think now it's easier for me to see how to keep those things separate. And I made reference a minute ago to I don't lose sleep over problems or issues and stuff. I really don't worry about that kind of stuff anymore because I know in the end it's just not that important. And to your question of how do you do it, you just got to be aware that it's necessary to keep those things apart. It's necessary to recognize they each have their own life and you just can't mix them up. If you do, it's a recipe for disaster. People get disappointed. People fail at it. It creates bad feelings. When you mix those things, you compromise integrity, you compromise your principles, which is really hard to do as an entrepreneur. When you got payroll coming up next Friday and there's not enough money in the bank, what do you do? And the pressure, the obligation you have to make sure you do it will lead you to do just about anything to make sure that you don't let people down. And that's the hard part. It's easy when there's plenty of money in the bank and things are going well and everybody's fat, dumb, and happy. But as an entrepreneur, you don't start that way. You're lucky if you can get there. And it's hard when you've got the pressure of things not going well to maintain the principles that you started with and your integrity and the ethics. I'm telling you, I have not always done it the right way. It gets gray and you start to look for how can I get by and what do you compromise? And as well, because I've made mistakes, I look back with such regret that I did that stuff. But had I not made those mistakes and really screwed up in the past, I wouldn't be where I am today because those are the lessons. And I suppose to your question of how do you do it, you got to listen to old farts like me who have made those mistakes to try and maybe impart that knowledge or wisdom so that others don't make the same mistakes I've made.
We were talking about entrepreneurship. We were talking about some of your ventures earlier on. You're working with Jack DeBoer. We went into a part of a conversation around risking only money. And then you were explaining how you've managed to figure it out because of trial and error. You know, there are things that you wished you hadn't done, but for whatever reason, they ended up occurring. And through this process, you realize that now today you don't have sleepless nights. I wanted to delve into that a little bit more because it is easier said than done, trying to keep things separate, risking only money. I'm an entrepreneur as well with my own company, and there's many entrepreneurs out there. Even if they're intrapreneurs and they're working with teams, it's the same thing. You've got many stakeholders, different partners, parties, relationships. is normally one of the challenging aspects, especially when a business is going through change, accelerating, decelerating, pivoting, whatever you want to call it. What have you learned from the different steps you've been through, different stages you've been through? And with regards to relationships, how are you managing to keep them intact today? And what did you learn from previously that allowed you to think this way?
There's a lot to talk about there. There's a lot of questions. I'm not sure I'm the oracle for relationships. I suppose one of the things that occurs to me when you talk about either entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, and I think we should maybe talk a little bit about intrapreneurship in a minute or so, two things occur to me. One, you've got to have a vision in your head about where you want to go. You've got to have a vision about what's the product, what's the brand, what's the objective of what you're trying to do. And if that's clear in your head, if you've got an idea of where you're going to get to, what it looks like when you get there, then you need to know and you need to accept not everybody is going to share that vision. They either won't see it or they disagree with it. And the ability, and I'm not the best at it, that's for sure, but the ability to get the ones who could be convinced to understand and to accept where you're going and recognize that there's certainly a group that either don't accept it, don't believe in it, they've got a contrary point of view or an ulterior motive, or they've got their own vision. And you're just going to have to find a way to leave them to the side or leave them to their own devices without getting in your way. In the end, it's harsh, but you have to know you're not going to be friends with everybody. And that's hard for some people. There's so many people who try so hard to be friends. I can give you a long list of people, a very long list of people who would not put me in the category of friends because I'm a nasty guy, but also because I push through with a vision or I push through with an idea or I push through with an approach to a problem that didn't sit well with them. But for the most part, many times I've been successful getting there anyway, because in my head, it was clear what it looked like when I was going to get there. And I just had to push through anyway, knowing that I couldn't bring everybody with me.
That's a completely key characteristic of an entrepreneur. It's definitely something that I faced when I was looking at and developing residence in. There were those people that got it, understood it, wanted to be part of it. And there were people that were obstructive, got in the way, said it would never work. Why are we wasting time on this? So even on an internal perspective, you can have that on an entrepreneurial. Can you just explain though, it's one thing having your vision. It's one thing sharing your vision. How do you push through on this in the right way? And I want to refer back to one of your videos that I've seen. And you mentioned that you don't sell by talking. I guess it's linked because if you have a vision, you want people to buy in, you're also selling, right? It is a sales approach you're taking, whether you want to call it sales or not. You're selling ideas and you're selling your idea to the team and the organization or the investors or whoever it is. How do you do it in a way that you can still push through? Yes, there will be people that don't buy in. How can you keep going? And at the same time, it's not talking too much. Balance that for me a little bit, because if I'm trying to sell a vision, I'm trying to get people to buy in, it feels like I need to be explaining myself, talking, being enthusiastic.
You've hit exactly on the core of it. I've always believed that every job in a company, every job in a business, really, no matter what the title is, your real job is salesman. Call it what you like. Your CEO or your new hire intern, your job is to sell. You have to sell your ideas, your vision, your capabilities, your desires. You've got to sell that to somebody or several somebodies. If you can sell it well, if you can sell it to one-on-one or with groups of people, if you can sell that idea, in my view, that's another word for leadership. If you've got that ability to sell, convincingly sell, and get people enthused about your idea or about your vision, that's synonymous with leadership. I'm well aware of the fact that for many people, sales is a dirty word. It's a derisory expression when you call somebody a salesman. I've had many people who thought they were insulting me when they said, geez, you're just a salesman. They were insulting me, but internally I took great pride in that because I don't think it's a bad thing. I've got an idea. I've got a vision. I've got a goal in mind. And whether it's one-on-one with you or in front of a group of employees or in front of a larger audience, I've got to convince, not everybody, but the majority of those people, my vision, my idea is the right one. Now, I'm not always successful at that. No salesman is always successful. It just doesn't happen. And so you get told no a lot of times in different ways. Either you get told no, you're not going to get that promotion in your job. You get told no, I'm not going to invest in your company. You get told no, that's a really bad idea. We're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead. That's no. But that doesn't mean you're a failure. That means you didn't make that sale. And you come back another time. Either you adapt your idea to make it fit, to make it work, to make it acceptable to the customer who's ever trying to buy that product or whatever it is you're selling, or you come back with a different idea. And I've done both. And there's so many stories about successful entrepreneurs. One that springs immediately to mind is Colonel Sanders, the chicken guy. He approached 128 banks for financing for his first chicken restaurant. And 128 of them said no, or 399, whatever the number, it doesn't matter. But it was 129 they said yes. And Kentucky Fried Chicken is the answer today. He didn't take no. He was a salesman, and no was an opportunity to revise the pitch, to go to the next one, to find somebody else. And I view that salesmanship, leadership is really virtually the same thing. And I know a lot of people that would look down their nose at me. I remember I have a joint degree, one of which is a marketing degree when I went to university. And as part of my marketing degree, it was required that you take a salesmanship class. And I didn't want to do it. It was really painful because I went in not wanting to take it, but it was required, so I had to. And boy, I remember it so clearly. The professor stood in front of a group of, I don't know, there must have been 25 of us in the room. And he said, none of you want to be here. You're all marketing majors. I get it. But he said, I'll tell you what, there's 25 of you in here. For the rest of your lives, 24 of you are going to be salesmen. I guarantee it. And I thought to myself, oh, look at this. I'm in a room with 24 other guys and they're all going to be salesmen because I'm going to be a marketing guy. I'm never going to be a salesman. And of course, ever since I've walked out of that room, every day since then, what have I been? A salesman. All the way through, a salesman.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I no longer take it as a negative or as an insult. I take some pride in it. That doesn't mean I'm always successful. Quite the contrary. Any salesman is told no more often than yes, that's for sure, and I'm no exception. No, that's when the sales process starts. How do I get you to yes? What do I have to do to get you to yes?
So let's explore that a bit further, because it seems as though as an entrepreneur, you're going to get a lot of knockbacks. You're going to get a lot of people that don't buy into what your vision is. The same with sales. As you mentioned, the Colonel Sanders story, 128 rejections before. There's so many stories about that. In terms of persistence, where do you go for strength to keep going? Or how do you think about it? Is it like you say, well, it's just part of the journey, it's just part of the game? Because a lot of people, if they get a no or they get a rejection or they try again and they get a rejection, at some point they give up. And I think that's the difference between successful entrepreneurs and those that aren't successful. One of them is just the ability to keep going.
Well, I would suggest there's two key traits to successful entrepreneurs. One, as you suggest, is you can't accept no as a personal rejection. You cannot accept no as the end of the road unless you've got some burning desire in your heart or your head that you've got to get somewhere, and a no is a temporary obstacle. It's not a permanent decision. You've got to have that in you. You've got to be able to either have it or create it or find it somewhere, because if no sets you back and depresses you or discourages you in some way, you might as well give up and go away now, because you cannot accept no. The other thing that distinguishes a successful entrepreneur from somebody who isn't, a successful entrepreneur has taken the step to try it. So many people say, well, geez, how do I get there? And the answer is, just like the old Chinese proverb, the longest journey begins with one step. A successful entrepreneur has got to try and be an entrepreneur. You've got to start. You can't sit at your desk in your comfortable job and go, how do I get there? What do I do? Where do I go? How do I be an entrepreneur? Okay, think about it and then do it. Go do something. Take that step out the front door. You've got to take a little risk. If you aren't going to take the risk to take that first step, it's impossible. You might as well try and win the lottery by not buying a ticket. You just can't do it. You got to buy the ticket. You got to take the step out the front door to try being an entrepreneur. If you're not sure about it, if you've got a great big idea, but you're not sure about do you have what it takes, well, then try a smaller idea first. In my case, I sold greeting cards door to door when I was a little kid, and had a paper route and all those other things you did. I suppose I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I was an entrepreneur when I was 12. And so I overcame that hurdle early on. And so I wasn't afraid to be an entrepreneur when the opportunity or the ideas hit me later in life, which isn't to say everybody bought greeting cards or all the businesses I've tried have been successful. Quite the opposite is true. Most of them have not. But you got to take the risk. You got to try. Otherwise, you're never going to get there.
Absolutely. It's so critical, that aspect. And I'd like to come back to it. The example from my side is it took me a long time. I was working, as you know, for Marriott, a great company in development. And for about 5 years, I knew I wanted to do something different. I knew I wanted to create something for myself. And I used that time. I spent time exploring with different people, business cases, looking at projects, looking at opportunities, all in my spare time, reading, getting coaching, all of these things, all with the view of testing, trialing. And what was really interesting was there wasn't one of them that I felt like, okay, this is it, it's going to work. At some point, I just said, that's it, I've got to go. At that point, I didn't have anything lined up. I knew that I would just end up procrastinating. And so I just took the decision to go. And when I stepped out the door, that's when it became real.
Right. You're different in that regard than 99% of the other people that want to run their own business. The main difference, you took the step. And the other ones sat there and go, I'm waiting for that bolt of lightning to hit me to go, right, I'm going to own a 100 million pound business. It doesn't work that way. You got to take the step. And you did it.
It's something you've obviously done a lot. I mean, looking back, you've mentioned something before about the importance of following your intuition, doing something that you enjoy. If you don't like what you're doing, stop it, was one of the things that you've said. It is easier said than done. And I think it's really critical to having the energy to succeed, especially as an entrepreneur. Let's talk about Cycas, because it's a great success story. And for those that don't know, Cycas, it's now one of the most successful white label management companies in Europe, with a multitude of franchises from all the international hotel organizations out there. Started from grassroots by yourself and your partner at the beginning. What made you go in that direction? I was just wondering if you can talk about intuition, gut instinct. What was it in those very early days that you said, this is the direction I need to be moving in? Was there something that started this movement?
There is some trial and error, past experiences, vision, old age, whatever you call it. But I had some insight into a business opportunity, let's call it that. It's what you refer to as a white label management, an independent management company. But even before that, I must back up the step before that. That wasn't the vision. We kind of evolved into that. The first step was the recognition of the extended stay hotel market, or the all-suite hotel market. It's called various things, service departments. They're all pretty much the same. I knew from my experience and my years in the States, that was a viable segment of the U.S. lodging business. It had become over the years, and around about 10% of the total U.S. hotel business is one form or another, all-suite hotels or corporate housing. They're all lumped into one big segment there, roughly 10%. And you made reference to the fact that I worked for Jack DeBoer in the early days of Residence Inn. That's where I learned about it and got exposed to it and became a disciple of the viability of that kind of product. When I got to Europe in the traditional hotel business, when I came back to Europe, I should say, because I was here in the late 70s working for Marriott, but I came back in the 90s, I guess, with another hotel company. In that experience, when I got back to Europe, I noticed that there weren't any extended stay hotels. There weren't very many service departments, and there certainly were no branded ones. And that always struck me as odd, because although I'm well aware of the difference between a European and American, I'm well qualified to observe the differences, I thought in this category there were more similarities. People traveled the same way. They had the same needs when they traveled. And so I couldn't figure out, and I scratched my head for the longest time, why aren't there service departments or extended stay hotels in Europe? And I never came up with a good answer. And so my answer became, well, there should be, and nobody's done it yet. And so I had the opportunity to go and work for IHG through friends of friends, acquaintances. They knew I had the extended stay experience from the US, and somebody in IHG said, well, gee, let's explore that opportunity. They came to the same question that I had come to. Why aren't there this kind of hotels in Europe? And I was hired initially as a consultant by IHG to explore or answer that question. And I was lucky. I worked as a consultant for just shy of a year, developing what became a business plan for Staybridge. It started out with the questions: how big is the market? Where are the price points? What's the right product category if you were going to introduce something? What was it? How do you bring it to Europe? And what's it look like? How is it different from the U.S.? That project, answering those questions, that business plan, became a presentation to the IHG board of directors for a business plan to develop and roll out Staybridge. Long story short, they accepted the plan and then hired me to implement the plan I had written as a consultant. That's when I became an employee of IHG. Now, as an employee of IHG, I was developing the Staybridge brand and rolling it out as a franchisor, as a developer, as an operating guy, as a brand guy for the Staybridge brand. But I must admit, I can do it now because I'm gone. They can't fire me. In the back of my head, I was always thinking there is a great opportunity. I had proven that in the paper that I wrote, and then I was proving it by developing it on behalf of IHG. But in the back of my head, because of this entrepreneurial interest or flair, I quite literally knew my first day on the job at IHG, I wasn't going to stay there. I knew from day one I was going to leave and somehow own or operate or run an extended stay hotel. I didn't know exactly how I was going to leave or when, and don't get me wrong, they got their money's worth out of me. I did a good job. I did exactly what they paid me for and some. But I was still always on the lookout for how do I get into this extended stay business on my own, much like you described yourself. While you had a job, still in the back of your mind, you're going, how do I get out of this job? What's the best way I can do that? And so the opportunity I saw wasn't in the white label management or the independent management company. That came later. It was, how do we get into the extended stay hotel business? Once we got into that, once we had the first hotel, which is the Staybridge Liverpool, which we still own, by the way, 10, 12 years after it opened, that proved to be successful. The other hotels followed, and then we kind of extended and said, right, the things that make these Staybridges successful, the service character, the culture of the company, the way we treat our guests, that's extendable into regular hotels. That's transferable into more traditional hotel types like Holiday Inns and Hiltons and Marriotts and so forth. That was an observation after the fact that service ethos that is so evident and so much part of the product of extended stay hotels is eminently transferable to traditional hotels and is valued by owners and clients both. And so our success in the third-party management very much come from our base, our foundation of understanding how to deal with customers in an extended stay environment. And we simply transfer that knowledge, transfer that customer approach over to our full-service hotels, and knock on wood, that's proven successful for us, and long may it last. It's not so hard. It's really not so hard. Sometimes people give us credit because we've got some secret sauce, some secret voodoo magic about how we're successful with the hotels, but it's really very simple. You smile at the guest and you treat them like people. You treat them like they're a neighbor or a friend or a relative with full respect and civility and appropriate decorum. All those things are important. But in the end, it's just treating the people like they're people. Hello, how are you? And genuinely caring what the answer is. It's rare in the hospitality business, in my experience. It's rare. And so if you can deliver it, it's a great recipe for success.
John, I think it's great. What I get a sense for is just your passion that you had early and also the passion that you still have when you're talking about your business and the business today. And just as a congratulations on the Industry Inspiration Award. And I think it's very well served and justified in terms of you getting that. And you say that it's an easy thing to do, and yet hospitality finds it hard to deliver on. I would like to explore this a little bit because one of the things that I was really impressed by when I saw your first Staybridge, the one I first saw was in London, in Stratford.
Yeah.
And I stayed, and you had an open night for the guests with some drinks. And there was the housekeeper, this is many years ago now. The housekeeper was actually there hosting the drinks, dressed up, really proud, smiling, chatting with all the guests. And I asked you what this was all about. I'd like you to explain this because I don't think it's fair coming from me, but I just thought it's a wonderful story and how you engage the staff with the guests. So I just wonder if you can explain that for the audience because I'd never seen that before.
Once again, it's an idea that is imported from the U.S. The very first Residence Inns, I remember so well, it was downtown Denver. We wanted an opportunity to get closer to the guests, and we invented this evening social hour, this evening drinks. It was simply beer and wine and potato chips and peanuts. It wasn't anything elaborate. It was more about then, and it still is today, an excuse to talk to the guests, an excuse to get comfortable with them. There are so many hotels around the world, I know you've seen them, where they have a Tuesday manager drinks night. Having been to many of them, what they are is like wedding reception lines. You get all the heads of departments that stand in line. They shake everybody's hand as they come in. You go get your obligatory drink and you stand there. They all stand in the line talking to each other and then looking at their watch. And when it's time to leave, they bolt out to the door. And the only interaction they had with the guests was shaking their hand when they came in. And I hate that. I just hate it because it's so disingenuous. It's not really human at all. And in all of our extended stay properties, depending on the brand, 1 or some cases 3, in one case 4 nights a week, we do a manager's reception. And there isn't any reception line. There isn't any greeting line. The manager or several managers, and it rotates because we have different heads of departments and other employees that are there who mix and mingle with the guests and chat with them as if it's your neighbors over to your house for a drink on a Friday or Saturday night is the equivalent. And unlike the stilted full-service wedding line reception, we're there to get to know you, talk to you a little bit, say hello, how are you? What did you do today? How was your day? Hey, how about that football game? Gee, that's a nice sweater. A conversation, a real conversation. You can't do it with every guest, of course, but if you do it a few nights a week, and for long stay guests, you can do it week after week, you get to know them as people. Dare I say, in some cases, you get to know them as friends, not always, but you get to know them as people, certainly. And that's such a different experience than a regular hotel. And it's integral to what an extended stay hotel is. It's integral to the product because we don't think of the people that stay there as guests. We think of them as temporary residents. They're living with us for a while and they're away from home. And not to play the sympathy card, but I will a little bit. If you're away from home for a few weeks, let alone a few months, let's face it, it's lonely. It's lonely to do that. And those folks, just like you or me, they want somebody to talk to. They're not around their family. They're not around their neighbors, their friends. And so you try and make the hotel, it's never going to replace it, but you try and take a step towards moving closer. And one of the ways to do that is to know the people that are there, the other guests or the people that work there. Just makes it more comfortable, more friendly, more welcoming, more home-like. That's the whole objective.
I totally buy that. I think what I was also impressed by was the fact that the housekeepers were hosting. And for me, that was an eye-opener because so much in the hospitality industry, the housekeepers are really forgotten. They're behind the scenes. They're normally cleaning the room when the guest leaves in the morning. By the time they get back, the room's all nicely prepared. They are the heroes of the industry. They're normally the most underpaid, the least appreciated, yet they have potentially one of the hardest jobs in the industry. They do have the hardest job. And what I really liked was the opportunity for you to be able to connect the guests with the housekeepers and say, this is Jane or this is Ken and he's been looking after your room, and they get to meet them. It becomes real. They become people. And I just think they are the heroes of the industry. And I just really appreciated the fact that you had made that connection in those very early days.
We have a very real expectation and a very real understanding that everybody in the hotel, you pointed out housekeeping, but maintenance, accounting, back of the house stuff, they all come in contact with guests all the time. And all of them should not have the rigid understanding that you have to salute and click a heel when you see a guest. You're supposed to talk to them like people. And the housekeepers and the maintenance guys, the back of the house, the people that don't have a lot of guest interaction, they're no different from those that do. They're supposed to be friendly and welcoming. And yet, as you point out, some of our best guest interactions come from the quirky housekeepers and the characters that we've got in the maintenance department who are encouraged and allowed to be themselves. Now, sometimes mistakes are made. Sometimes they go too far. Sometimes it happens. But I always say that, look, for the one guest out of 100 where the housekeeper has been a little bit too cheeky or the maintenance guy has said something slightly inappropriate, I'll take that 1 out of 100, because the 99 out of 100, the reaction I want, nothing could make me happier than from a guest to walk away from one of those interactions or walk out of the hotel or check out somehow and go, gee, that was different. I never saw that in a hotel before. That absolutely makes my day. Then we've achieved it. And for you to say, gee, I've never seen that in a hotel before, that's exactly what we want the guest to walk away from. Nobody's going to ever walk away from a hotel and go, wow, those are the best curtains I've ever seen in a hotel. Wow, look at the fibers in that carpet. Isn't that Nobody will ever in a million years say that. But to walk away and go, geez, I just bumped into this maintenance guy. You won't believe the quirky character this guy was. I've never seen that in a hotel before. You'll tell that to 10 friends. You're never going to tell anybody about what a great pillow cover there was on the cushion in my bedroom at this hotel. So, yeah, that's what we're going for.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's working really well. I also like the fact you've democratized the team and the interaction. You call your teams Cycas. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
We didn't come up with it. There was a group of employees that came up with it. It's a sense of belonging to something. The technicalities of how it works, because we're a third-party manager, most of the employees are technically not on our payrolls. They're on the payrolls of the owners. And so technically they don't work for us, but of course they do work for us because they're in our hotels that we manage. But we wanted to connect them somehow to each other within the property and between the properties, especially given that we have different types of properties and different brands. And we were looking for a way to connect them. And there was a group of employees who started calling themselves at the one property Cycas. And it just stuck. And now it's through all of the company. And it's a sense of belonging. It is genuinely a team or a connection that they belong to something. And it's a way I want them to feel in the company is they belong to something bigger than just their department or their hotel. They belong to a company that's kind of doing things. And I want them to be proud of it. And putting a handle on it or a name on it, Cycas, helps us achieve that. We use it a lot in the company.
I guess also it's nice that they feel like they belong to each other as well, right? That they're somehow connected. I wanted to talk a little bit about Prime Candidate. Maybe you could just explain the initiative for those that aren't aware of it. Those Cycas that are listening, they will know about it. But could you explain about Prime Candidates and the importance of this with regards to your company?
I sometimes wonder if our people and culture team didn't invent it just to appease me because I have gray hair. They were trying to make sure that I was included. But leaving that aside for a second, I must say it's a very pragmatic initiative, as hiring the right people is always hard, and it's especially hard these days. I expect finding good, dedicated, qualified, enthused people is really difficult. It came to us that there was a whole group of the population, there was a whole segment of the population that were potentially the right fit. And so we started working with organizations that are specialized in finding people that are retired or older or no longer working for what was their original occupation, but are still healthy enough mentally and physically that they want to be involved either because they want the money or because they want the activity or because just in general they still feel they've got something to contribute to society, any or all of those things combined. And with the fact that they've got some decent life experience, they've got some maturity to understand how to deal with customers and the expectations of the business, they make really terrific employees. They're really dedicated. They're really reliable. They know what it is, an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. They've just become a whole group of really terrific employees. I wish we could find more of them, and we will over time. We will find more of them because it's a really viable source for helping us deliver the product we want, which is that genuine warmth and hospitality. If you take somebody that's got some life experience, I hesitate to say what the age cutoff is because whatever number I pick is going to offend somebody. So I'll just say somebody in the autumn of their lives, perhaps, put it that way, and let people define it themselves. They've got that life experience. They're coming to work or they're coming for the job because they want to. Most often it's not because they have to. It's because they want to. They want to make a contribution. They want to participate. They want to be part of something. And they want to deliver a service or a product that just makes them a really good team member for us, a really good psych cadet. Gee, I wish we could find more of them.
It's also a two-way street, isn't it? I mean, I wonder at what point as an entrepreneur do we have a responsibility to start giving back? Do you have a personal philosophy or approach to this? Is there a deeper purpose to what you do? Because for me, this has huge societal benefit above and beyond. Obviously, you're creating jobs, which is fantastic. You've got the positive economic impact, which is fantastic. And then you have a societal impact by doing something like this. I just wonder if when you're embarking on maybe this venture, when you've got into this venture and also future ventures, do you have a feeling that there is a need to do more as an entrepreneur?
Yes and no. I certainly look for a way to make sure that we are good corporate citizens, that we're good people in our community, participating in charity events, helping the people that come to us, making sure that we're good stewards of our environment. Those things are really important. And that's incumbent on anybody in any kind of business to not just ignore your impact on your neighborhood or the people around you or the enterprises that are working with you. So we make sure, and I'd like to think that all of the people that work with us and for us and in our hotels, in fact, have that awareness to be good citizens, to be good corporate citizens. On the other hand, and it connects to your point about, is our effort in this hiring seniors, is it some altruistic goal that we're doing it? And this will be perhaps a little bit controversial, and I've extended it. I must be honest, I'm not hiring senior citizens or anybody of a particular race or gender or sexual. I'm not hiring them to fill some quota or to fill some perceived obligation I have. I'm hiring them because they're good for my business. I'm hiring them because they can do the job we need to be done. And that's the sole criteria that makes sense for me as a business. Some people will go, well, it's too harsh and too cold, but I don't think that's contradictory with hiring people that are different or hiring people that need it or contributing to the community. Those two things are one and the same. It's good for my business to hire the best person for the job, regardless of what their profile is or what their social standing is or what their orientation or any of that stuff. Doesn't matter to me. I hire them because they're good for my business. And if it's good for my business, they're gainfully employed, we both win. It's a win-win. So I tend not to distinguish or try not to look at somebody's profile or somebody's demographic background. I don't really care. I look at it from a selfish point of view. Is it good for my business? And as I say, those things are not contradictory. They're one and the same thing. So yeah, I think I probably have a slightly different view because I know it might not be politically correct to say what I just said. But as I said, I really think and I really hope that our businesses, our hotels, you hire people for, I'll paraphrase Martin Luther King because I think it's really appropriate. It's not the color of their skin, it's the content of their character that makes them the kind of people that I want. I did a horrible job with this quote, but the meaning is there, paraphrasing it. It's what's in their heart, what's in their head that makes them a viable employee. Yeah, there's plenty of those people from all walks of life and all kinds of backgrounds that make it viable to run a good business with them involved.
I think it's absolutely critical to have an inclusive business and an open mindset to creating the best possible company. I believe in order to be long-term successful as a business, you have to do things for the good. It has to be a good business. You have to treat people well. You have to treat your customers well. You have to pay fairly. You have to have a positive impact on the society and those around you. And I think just in the last few minutes, you mentioned the word good about 20 times. I just get an impression that you want to do good by everybody that you connect with, the work that you're doing, the company that you're running. You want to be, maybe proud is too strong, but I feel like as an entrepreneur, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you want to be creating something that is good. Put it this way, as an entrepreneur, I don't want to just create something to make money for money's sake. I want to create something that is special, that is unique, that has an impact, that resonates, that is different, that has a change on people's lives. Maybe it's in the way that they stay or the way that they experience or that they feel. So I just wondered, as an entrepreneur, how important is it to have a purpose in terms of the impact that you want to provide, whether it's for the benefit of the economy, the society, people?
Maybe I can answer your question this way about what drives me today, and frankly, I think what's always driven me perhaps as an entrepreneur. I must tell you, it's never for me been about money. Now, I'm not naive enough and I'm not simplistic enough to say that I don't care about it. Of course I do. I want more next year than I had this year. You can never have enough, and I want a bigger paycheck and all that stuff. But that's not what gets me going. That's not what drives me. It never has been. It is instead today, and it's been since the very beginning of Cycas. I want to have a company, I want to have individual hotels that I can be proud of. I want to run properties that I can brag to my friends and my neighbors and to other people in the industry. I want to brag about awards we've won and TripAdvisor scores that we've had. And I've always felt, and I absolutely believe that if the hotel is to a point where I can brag about those kind of things, the service standards and the accolades, the profitability will follow, the owners will be happy, the brands will be happy. So that is my single biggest criteria for success, is bragging rights. There's many criteria, of course, but the one that's easiest to put a handle on, I always look at TripAdvisor scores. And where do my hotels rank on TripAdvisor scores in their local categories? And all of our hotels score really well. Newcastle, which we've run for years, has been number one hotel in Newcastle for 3 or 4 years running. Liverpool, it's been open for 12 years, never been below number 4 on TripAdvisor. As I speak today, I think it's number 3. It usually goes between number 2 and 3. We've got a little hotel in Vauxhall in London, 93 rooms in a secondary location in London. There's 1,050 hotels in TripAdvisor. Vauxhall today is number 36 last time I looked. That's out of 1,050 hotels were in Vauxhall. Nothing gives me greater pride than to tell you the little old Staybridge that we run in Vauxhall is rated higher according to TripAdvisor than Four Seasons, than the Ritz, than the Intercontinental Park Lane, than the Dorchester. Now that's a fact. Okay, there are other factors involved, but I can say factually, I am involved in a hotel. We run a hotel in London that's higher rated than the Four Seasons, than the Dorchester and the Ritz. That is a fact. I cannot tell you the pride that that gives me, and that's what drives me. That's what drives our company, is being able to make those kind of claims about the hotels we run. I'm not going to mention them, but we run some brands that are not the best known or the best loved brands in the world. Okay, that's fine. But I can tell you those brands, they're the highest rated within their category. I'm struggling not to mention the names, but we run the best one of these hotels of all of those hotels. And that gives me some sense of accomplishment. And I hope it gives the people that work in those hotels, and the ones that actually deliver the service, it gives them the pride, as it should do. It gives them the pride because they've created it. And as I said before, that's the product. That's what brings people back. That's what makes the owners happy. That's what makes the customers coming back. The brands are happy. It provides jobs. It's just a win-win-win every way you look. And it's all about delivering that service and making customers smile and happy. And if you do, they'll rate you highly. You'll get the reputation, and it just self-perpetuating. It just continues to grow. Success builds on success. It's what underlies all of the hotels we run, is that guest service, that deliverability of that product. It's how I measure success for the company. It's how I measure success for me. If we started running hotels that who cares, and yeah, okay, fine, we check people in and yeah, it's fine, I wouldn't do it anymore. Because what pride is there in that? Yeah, I claim about my profit margins. Who cares except the owner? Nobody cares about that. What's important, I literally run my company and the people who work there because I've got nothing to do with it. I run the best hotel there is in Newcastle, according to TripAdvisor. I run the best hotel in Newcastle. I can say that. It's a fact. And I just love it. I just love it.
That's brilliant. This is meant in a very positive way. You sound like a proud father talking about children, teenagers, and then those that have matured and gone to great universities. So
it's a very good analogy because as I look at these hotels, Liverpool, Newcastle especially, I feel exactly that way. I saw them when they were born, and I've seen them through all the trials and tribulations in the meantime. And now I kind of step back and I watch them being quite successful on their own with little or no involvement for me. So it's a very apt analogy about a proud parent.
Well, I think what I love about all of this and what I sensed from our discussion is the passion that you have for being proud of them. And as an entrepreneur, each of us needs to find what it is that creates that passion, what it is that motivates us to get out, jump out of bed, hopefully, if we can, in the mornings. It's unique to everyone, unique to everybody who's an entrepreneur. It's very personal, but it feels like and it sounds like you've really connected with what motivates you and drives you forward.
I think so. And I think underlying that is the fact that for whatever reason, wherever it comes from, I'm really having a good time with it. I really like it. I like what I do, mostly because of the pride that I just shared with you. But I like dealing with the people in the hotels, not everybody, but I like most of them. They're good people and I have fun. And one of the cultural attributes of Cycas is we laugh. Most of the time we laugh and have a good time. Yes, there are serious moments and there are troubles and trials and tribulations. That's life. But most of the time we have a laugh and people make fun of me and I make fun of them and we tell jokes and we do stupid things. And gee, how lucky am I that I get paid for having fun? Because I go to these hotels and I see the people that are working there. And again, yeah, sometimes they're hard things, but most of the time it's fun and we can laugh and have a good time. It doesn't have to be so serious. And yeah, lucky me, that's my job.
I think that's the wonderful thing about hospitality, and I think we forget it sometimes, but that's also the business we're in. John, just to maybe finish this has been an absolute pleasure. One of the things that springs to mind is by, I don't know if you know him, but somebody called Joseph Campbell, and he coined the phrase to follow one's bliss. I think it's a really nice expression because it kind of encompasses happiness, enthusiasm, passion, all of these things, and also a sense of being serene, calm, combined with it. And it seems like that you've found your bliss, you're following it. Yeah, it's just been a pleasure having this conversation with you, John. I'm sure for the audience, they have found the same too.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm flattered by your interest. If anybody listens to this, I'll be even more flattered. But you're right to take on. I hadn't heard that expression, follow your bliss. But gee, aren't I a lucky guy? Perhaps it's taken me a few years to get here, but aren't I a lucky guy that I'm doing what I like? I don't have to, and I'm doing it anyway because I like it. How lucky can one guy get? Thank you. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you.